We are going to talk about CSS container queries. My name is Mikhail Larchanka. I work as a whatever developer already in SciTech. My current project is in Rabobank and I'm the DevOps there, but like originally I'm front-end developer. And I want to start the same as you did from the problem. What is the problem which we're going to solve with this CSS container queries? The problem is in the development itself. So how we did development in the past. So, or like when we start, for example, you want to start with front-end development, you start from the scratch, and how you usually develop website. You write HTML, you write CSS, and you write JavaScript. In the past, it was probably the only method to make a site in the 90s, for example, because there was nothing except HTML, CSS, we can call it, and JS script and JavaScript. There were two this time. What happened later? Later we figured out templates. They came from the backend language and we have a lot of them. We have PHP templating, we have free market nowadays, like JS6 for example, it's also kind of template, kind of. Yeah. So we started to create templates, write CSS for these templates and then JavaScript. And these templates allow us to create same pages using one HTML, let's say, because previously you need 10 pages, you create 10 HTMLs with the same content except maybe the middle part. Now we can reuse parts of the page and build pages much faster. Then we created, as developers, we invented CSS preprocessors. So we started to use Sass, less, stylus. CSS and JS is not preprocessor, but like a way not to write CSS and to use something inside like functions. And our way changed. Now we use templates to build HTML, we use Sass, less, whatever preprocessor you want, name it, for building CSS, and we still use JavaScript. And then we invented frameworks. We created them, we figured out that they exist, and we started to develop frameworks. Nowadays, nobody is searching for like pure front-end developer. You have or exact name of the framework you should know, or maybe multiple of them. So you should know one of them to start working in this company, for example. So we're not writing HTML nowadays, like high-skilled developers working in a big project. They're not writing HTML, they're not writing CSS anymore, and not writing pure JavaScript. So we have framework with a TypeScript on top, we have CSS preprocessor, and a template. And then if your company is huge enough or big enough, like mine, Rabobank, for example, you have many projects. You have many applications which should have the same view. So that's where we started to build components libraries. Even today, even for small projects, you have this storybook, for example, where you have your components, and if you want to build an interface, you grab components which already exist and just combine them together, and you have the application. And as we are talking about CSS specific property, so the biggest problem for us in this components library, that's a modular developer. So we build small modules, small components which are used. Gonna be CSS itself. So this is a problem we have, CSS, because it's really hard to make a scope for CSS. If you have the same class name in one component and in another component, they can start fighting with each other, the styles, and then you have unpredictable results. Of course, there are many ways to do it. You can have like shadow DOM and use CSS within the shadow DOMs, and it's not exposed outside. You can use some like libraries or tools which will rename your classes in unique names, which is then really weird to watch in the HTML, in the elements, and then figure out which is the original class name where you need to do changes. But this is a small one. What if you need to build something like this? So CSS is a problem, and we want to build a component which is looking like this, for example, on a small screen. Let's call class CArticle, for example. And on a big screen, it's called CArticle, but here you have, it's the same class, it's just the difference in the view. So it's easy to build. You already told us about media queries, so we just create a media query for small screen. Look like this, for big screen, look like this. But what if you need the same component looking differently on the same page? For example, on the left side it should be vertical, on the right side it should be horizontal. You cannot do it with media queries probably. You can try, of course. That's how it's gonna be. So the default vertical styles, and then you have bigger screen, you apply horizontal styles. And if screen is small, you will stuck with like less than 800 pixels. You will stuck with the vertical view everywhere, because media query checks the size of the window, and if it's big enough, you will only have horizontal. There is no image for this. Images are not mine, I forgot to tell. I stole them from this guy. and he didn't draw an image for a situation when you only have horizontal ones. So looks like we cannot build this component doing the stuff we need. So we need or two components or additional class on top to make this, to make this work. So media query will not help you. It's the same component with a different view. And media query will check this size, of course. So we need some solution for this. JavaScript can be a solution, of course. But we have another one. And the solution we're going to talk about is CSS Container Queries. So what's the difference between CSS Container Queries and media queries? Media query is taking width or height, whatever media query you use, of the window. So you see smaller windows, smaller width, like media query. Bigger window, bigger media query. When you use CSS Container Queries, it checks the size of the parent container. So it doesn't care about the window itself. It just checks what's the size of the parent container. If it's small, we do vertical. If it's big, we do horizontal. And this is literally what helps us to solve our problem. How you do it? Probably you all used to heard about flex boxes or grids. So when you use flex box or grid, for the parent component, you should say you are grid container or you are flex box container, right? So you display flex or display grid, something like this. When we're talking about CSS Container Queries, you should also tell the parent container that he is literally like container query. He should work with container queries. So for parent container, you set container type, inline size. There are multiple values here. It can be just size, it can be revert layer, whatever. But this is the main one, and everybody right now uses only this one. What does inline size? It says that this wrapper uses container queries within, only related to the inline sizing. So if it's a horizontal container, inline size is width. If it's a vertical container, inline size is height. So only queries related to this like direction will be applied. So if I have horizontal container here and I will say like min height blah blah blah, this container query will not be applied here because I have horizontal container. If you will put just if you will put just size, then it applies to the inline sizing and also to the box sizing. Whatever box is changing in any direction, you can apply container queries in.
Do you want questions as you go?
Yeah, of course.
Is there a performance reason why you need to specify this on the parent? Why wouldn't every...
You will see that. You will see later. And now we can just write these container queries. It's the same as media query. Instead of media, you put container. You put your min width, max width, width, max height, min height, whatever you want, and then you just apply styles to the element. Looks pretty simple, I think, but that's not, and this allows us already to do this, but that's not it. There is another property called container name, and that's a pretty nice one. The thing is that you can give to a parent container, to the parent, which is which is accepting container queries, the specific name. And it means only queries with this name will be applied to this container. So you can, for example, create a component, reuse it within the different parents with the different names and apply different styles to it in the same time. And you can put multiple names here. You can put card, space, panel, whatever. And that's how, if we will return back to C article class, that's how our final solution will look here. We put default styles at the vertical ones, and then we create a container query for a specific parent, let's say. If we want, of course, we can remove this. If we want to apply to every container, but if we want a specific one, we put here the name, and then just specify the styles.
Can you call your container any name you want?
Yeah, of course, whatever. But it should apply the same rules as you have for keyframes, for example. No spaces, starts from the letter, not from the number, and all this stuff. Yeah, and here is an example how you can use it with multiple names. For example, you can apply card panel. In card, you will change, for example, the size. In panel, you can change the color. So in this container, both will be applied. But then you can create container with one of these names, for example, with card, and this container will only apply size, for example, which is really useful. About browser support, that can be interesting because you might think it's something new and not supported somewhere, but it's supported everywhere, except Opera Mini and Internet Explorer, we shouldn't care about. Like this one is not existing for like 10 years, It's not updated anymore. And Opera Mini still exists, but nobody cares. If you know what it is. Who doesn't know what Opera Mini does?
I only know Opera for desktop.
So Opera Mini is a special mobile browser. They have one feature which was helping a lot for different people. So the idea is every time you open a website in Opera Mini, you are not directly opening the website. It goes to their own servers, compresses it, and returns you back compressed version. So it requires less traffic from you. But the problem is when it compresses it, it breaks a lot. So it removes some styling, some JavaScript. So Opera Mini was rendering websites which are sometimes were not working correctly. That's why only in countries where internet is pretty expensive they use it. But I think the biggest country using it was Russia in the past, but internet in Russia is so cheap nowadays, mobile, cheapest probably in the world, or one of the cheapest. So they are not using it anymore also. But there is another browser support, and this is for, I didn't tell about this, I will tell now quickly. It's support for the container query units. So there are also additional measurements, units, which you can use for your widths, paddings, etc. And it's not like percentage or pixels or whatever. It's this percentage of the parent width, of the parent container width or height, depends on the direction. And it's called CQW, which is container query width, CQH, container query height, CQI, container query inline, so it means if you have horizontal container, it will be applied to the width, from the width, if it's vertical from the height. Then you have CQB box, so it depends on all sizes of the container, so width, height. You have CQ mean, it's a container query minimal value, and container query maximal value. You never use them, have no idea why people created it. And it's also supported in all browsers. So previously, in your example, you have VW, so it was like, let's say, percentage of the viewport width, of the browser width. But here with this, you can totally depend on the parent. If parent is big, your font, for example, is big within your component. If parent is small, your font is also small. And now the conclusion, probably the most important part. And the first question in the conclusion I want to answer is when and how to use media queries. Because we still have them, you remember, right? So this is an answer. You need to use media queries for global layout changes. If it's gonna be like, as you mentioned, the right part drops down, but for the global layout. Or it can be, for example, variables, which you want to change based on the size of the window or whatever. So that's where you can still use media queries. And don't forget that media queries, it's not only about sizing. Media queries, it's also about user settings in the browser. So media queries with this also works. So you can check whether is it dark or light theme on the computer of the user. If he reduced motion, doesn't want a lot of animations, maybe he increased or decreased contrast, etc. So you still need to use media queries, for example, here. Because it's not a container like property, let's say, it's an application. It's come from the application, so on the global level. Then this,
I guess those are very useful when you are optimizing your site for accessibility, for example.
yeah. So if you want to reflect on how user changed his browser settings, for example. But then where and how to use container queries? This image also from the guy, he proposed to use it here. In these examples, I wouldn't read this. I would say you can use it everywhere instead of media queries. Even for the global layout, if you want, for your global layout, your body gonna be your container. So you just set up container time inline size to your body, and then you can apply container queries to the layout. But ideally, it's still better to use media queries, because then you, based on the code, see it's a global changes in these media queries. If it's a container query, it's related to some specific module.
Is there a performance difference between using these two?
No, like not significant one, let's say. Probably there is, but people are saying, like everybody saying, no, there's no difference. But I can imagine if you have multiple parent containers with a lot of like small elements in it with less container queries, and you have many of them on the page, it can somehow affect it, because a browser needs to recalculate every single one based on the parent size. You resize window, it's not like you recalculate just based on the window resize. It recalculates based on every parent resize. So yeah, this is query containers. Oh, I was pretty quick, by the way.